Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to Podshoot. And I'm very happy to have back Carey Wedler. I really enjoyed the first conversation we have. I think I subscribe to her Substack and watch some of the videos she also posts on a Telegram channel. And I always think she does a great job with her content. Very interesting perspective, and really a pleasure for me to have an opportunity of speaking with her again. Hi, Carey. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I just
Thanks for
finished.
having me back.
I had I do with the Bruce Fine. I do something called Fine Points, and we have now like a panel, and that I did. I at that I expected to be like a 90-minute, and it ended up almost 3 hours, and just finished 15 minutes ago. So
Nice.
I thought I'd have an hour break, but this is good. So, Carey, what is it that's of interest? What are the topics that are most interesting for you right now?
Oh, the news cycle's so slow, so it's so hard to find something to talk about these days. Well, obviously, we have all of the shenanigans going on in the Middle East, which I find interesting. I also feel like it's interesting to look at things that are not being discussed when something that huge is going on. Something very interesting too. I don't know. I feel like there's so many options. We can talk about ideology. We can talk about actual developments in the news cycle. We can talk about maybe what's not being discussed in the news cycle. We can talk about what I believe to be. I can't trust anything coming out of the news right now. I don't believe anything any of the world leaders say. I never do. But it seems like, especially when times are so tense and the stakes are so high, it seems especially hard to believe that these people in power who are negotiating, quote, pieces or dropping the bombs or ordering the bombs, it's really hard from my perspective of distrust of authority and government and knowledge of history. It's really hard to just believe that the stories and the narratives that are coming out from the top are actually describing what's happening in reality.
So, what do you think the stories are that are not being told that should be told, that are maybe the real story, and what's being told is just distraction from the real story? So, what do you think are the real stories that aren't being told?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is a really common trend. There's a website I use called I think it's the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they are always reporting on bills coming out that are threatening to privacy and civil liberties. There's a new one. I think it's called something about fakes, something about policing fakes online. But as usual, there was one called Take It Down Act as well, and that was supposed to be about non-consensual either deep fakes or actual content, but of a sexual nature, and sounds really great and it gets bipartisan approval. And then you look at how it actually works, and there are some really questionable mechanisms for how this information is taken down. And as usual, speech can, free speech, protected speech can get caught up in those mechanisms. So there's a new one coming out now. I'd have to check the exact name of it, but it refers to another, just delegating more power to take content down and creating new pathways, kind of outsourcing it to the third-party corporations, but still it's under the purview of government authority. And this has been happening quite a lot. There's another one, I think it's actually on behalf of Hollywood. This one was introduced, it's not as far along. But there's always something going on. And then, of course, the FBI is talking about sleeper cells. So from my perspective, I'm watching people who are very correctly saying, yes, my freedom is more important than your security or your safety, going into, oh no, the sleeper cells might be activated and we need more government authority. So that's a rough one to watch. But I can't even keep up because I've been really trying to follow what's going on in the Middle East and try to tease out some semblance of what's actually happening. And I'm kind of getting sucked into that as well, and I had to take a step back. I felt like I needed to make a video, and I just felt my nervous system getting so amped up that I was like, nope, we're going to chill this weekend. If something comes to mind, cool. If not, then too bad. We don't have to say something about everything. And maybe that's something worth talking about too, is just how activated all of these events can get us. And then people kind of get whipped into hysteria. And that's actually a perfect place to be. If the end goal is, go ahead.
You said that's the perfect place to be, hysteria?
Well, it's where the ruling class really benefits from the masses being. Yes. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get all those words out to say what I wanted to say. But yeah, I think the more activated people are, the more stressed out, the more panicked, the less clearly they're thinking. And it's a lot easier for people in power to take advantage of that and manipulate that and exploit it.
And how panicked are you finding people more panicked than usual?
I think it depends on the day. And it's interesting because it seems right now the real panic I'm seeing is from people who really, 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 really want to be right about Donald Trump. So when everything has been going on and, you know, then the US is striking Iran and then he's saying there's peace, I think the most like grasping, difficult, stressed energy I've seen is people really wanting their assumptions to be proven correct. So either Donald Trump made peace or he's starting World War III, and there's such activation around it. And so I maybe not panic at this point, but if something happens with those sleeper cells, I would expect panic. And then a lot more people begging for the government to take a lot more authority. I mean, we've seen this so many times before. It's pretty predictable in that sense.
Yes, I think I knew the sleeper cells were going to be coming at any time, in any minute.
Right.
So even though I think it's highly unlikely that there'll be any sleeper cells, they're probably very dormant and won't be awoken for centuries, if ever. And they probably might not even exist at all. So I don't see why Iran would think that is constructive strategy or productive strategy. I don't think what they would get out of that. And I think I think there's a difference between somebody who's a rational actor who makes a tactical or strategic mistake as opposed to somebody who's an irrational actor. And most of the time, these people are called crazy, and they're not crazy, and they're not irrational actors. They're rational actors who, like any rational actor, will miscalculate and make tactical and strategic mistakes. So, but if we took the time to listen to somebody else's perspective, other than mainstream media or some politician, who are lying to you, you might then be able to sit back and reflect upon, why this is happening and why it makes sense for them to do what they're doing. You might not like it. It might not be good. It might not make peace throughout the world. It might not be socially beneficial, but it might be a good thing for them to do, right, given their utility function. So, and we have to take a look at what their utility function is, why their utility function is what it is, and why their behavior is rational. I mean, like when I take a look at Iran, it's Bibi has been saying for over 30 years, right, that tomorrow Iran is going to have a nuclear weapons and they'll use it against Israel. Okay, so he's been wrong for 30 years. Okay? Right. There's no one has been able to make any case. He didn't go to the UN. Well, he did go to the UN once and drew a nice little drawing there. Okay. That was about 5, 6, 7 years ago. He wrote a nice drawing with a red line. Okay, said they crossed the red line and they were going to be nuclear. By the time he left, his speech was over. They were going to be nuclear. So there might be less evidence that they're on a path to building nuclear weapons, as Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Right. So then the question is this is a quote preemptive act. So the question is if you're in Iran situation and even if there's suspicion of somebody's doing something that justifies Bibi Netanyahu sending all the weapons he gets from the U.S. so against him, and then the U.S. sending its bunker buster bonds to do over them. So then you have to sit back and say, what's my incentive to do? Either be a serf state to both of them, or maybe I want to figure out how to get nuclear weapons, because I noticed they're not doing this to Pakistan or India or North Korea. Okay, and I noticed what happened. Libya, they left alone until Libya had a nuclear weapon. Then Libya gave up their nuclear weapon, and then what happened? Gaddafi died. What would be the situation in Zelensky in Ukraine now if they didn't surrender their nuclear weapons? Yeah. Likely this war, Russia would not be claiming all this territory in Ukraine if Ukraine kept its nuclear weapons. So there's utility to owning nuclear weapons, and clearly, Israel's not fighting for its own security. Israel's fighting to be the hegemon in the region, and they want to be an uncontested hegemon, and we want to be an uncontested global hegemon. Except maybe carving a little space for China and a little space, as long as they don't go into Taiwan, and while we're going into Greenland and Panama and who knows where else, and and good that Putin is going into Ukraine, because Ukraine refused to help Trump when he asked for it, so they deserve it. So so outside of that. But I personally right now I'm struggling and trying to figure out what next. Now that we sat down and we have the ceasefire, how long is this ceasefire going to last? And what is, I guess it's in Iran's best interest to have the the weapons inspectors in to validate that they don't have nuclear weapons, and then to kick them out and then say, well, we should be more like Israel. We should not sign the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and then just deny we have nuclear weapons. It seems to work for Israel. Maybe the same thing should work for me. What I'm most troubled from, and always when these situations happen, is just how little rational discourse there is.
Yeah.
So there's got to be good and evil. This one is only good. This one's evil. Yeah. The good person is virtuous. The bad person is a lunatic. Yeah. So not and it's really a simple-minded, brainless conversation. Or then we go back to, well, we have shared values, but we just heard people from the Trump administration saying, well, we're not going to interfere with anyone anymore, and basically it's never about shared values anymore. Our shared values are, you leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. That didn't seem to last too long. That
right.
that I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone, because Iran was not making any threats to I don't know how recently the government has said death to America. I mean, there might be some people who say death to America, right, in Iran, but I don't think the government has been threatening, the annihilation, right, of that. And I don't know when was the last time Iran did a first strike against Israel. Has Iran done a first strike against Israel?
That I'm unclear about. And it's so interesting because it seems like, especially in this conflict, it's so easy to cherry pick things to make it your version of reality that suits what you want to be the end objective. And I think everyone's guilty of this. I really try to check myself, but then you find conflicting information. And something I find that people who are very pro-Israel do, and I think this is true for everybody, I just notice it more with the pro-Israel crowd, because I've been in those channels on X, which is, it's talk about why I'm stressed. Social media is so stressful, and it's designed to be that way. But there's a very good nitpicking quality where the fact checking they're doing does not really change the end conclusion. But it's like, death by 1,000 cuts. And you'd be like, well, you use that term and it's not technically that term. And you're using that term and that's actually not what it is. And people are still dying, but you used the wrong term. So I don't have to listen to anything you say. And it comes down, I love that you mentioned the good versus evil thing, because that's something I've really been observing, especially right now, is it's such an, I hate, it sounds condescending, but it's such an infantile perspective of the world to have. I see so many comments from big influencers. It's like, this is good versus evil, guys. We're the good guys and we're taking out the bad guys. And it's like, are these children's movies we're talking about? It's reduced to such a false dichotomy of well, we're good and they're bad, and therefore we are justified in even adopting the same tactics the bad people might do because we're good. So we're allowed to do it and they're not, and they're bad because they do it. But if we do it, we're actually good. And that's another thing I've seen so much is when Trump authorized those strikes and people were saying, hey, this is unconstitutional. You can't just drop bombs on another country. It became, where were you when Obama was dropping bombs on other countries? Where were you when Biden was? Well, a lot of people were criticizing both. They were saying, no, you can't just do that. But the default construct here is, well, it's okay that my guy did it because this guy that I really hate also did it. And it just, reason goes out the window, and it becomes so simplified and so basic. And it's so many assumptions. I've seen so many people, for example, Justin Amash, he's a former representative in Congress, and he's always consistently anti-war. So he's been calling out the strikes. And he gets all these comments. Where were you when Biden did that? And he replies with like 17 tweets that are condemning the things this person has assumed that Justin Amash never condemned. And I think the reason just goes out the window, and it becomes more of an emotional drive. You really need to feel like your side is in the right. And it's scary. It's stressful. I don't like knowing that bombs are dropping and people are dying and there's conflict. And I have opinions on how this all started and the roots of it, but I don't want anybody to die. I don't even like government officials getting assassinated, however evil they may be. I just don't think violence is the solution. And people can call me naive, but I look at history. I look at all of these empires, all of these governments, and I kind of see a common thread here. Who are the people making war and dividing people, and who benefits from this division? And it's usually always the people with authority, and it's happening again. And it's just sad to see so many people fall in line with the narratives that really benefit the ruling class, as opposed to pausing and trying to look at the gray area. Because that's what always falls by the wayside in these conflicts, is the gray area. And to me, it's all gray area.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's all gray. So, and we should all have a sense of humility that it is all gray. And that's the best way to have a sense of humility, is to appreciate that it's all gray. So if we think we have all the answers, we're delusional. And, one of the things I've learned from this is that Bin Laden and the Japanese made a big mistake. The Japanese should have said, Pearl Harbor was just a response to your, we're not committing war against you. Right. This is just a one-off.
Right.
Okay? So let's stop here. Okay. We bombed Pearl Harbor because you were having blockading our ports. So we decided to take out some of your fleets so we could actually engage in global trade. But we're not hurting. We're not at war with the American people. We're not at war with the nation. We're just at war with those ships.
Right. Exactly.
Not the war. Okay. Bin Laden, our only problem was the World Trade Center. Okay.
You're
I don't have a problem with the American people. I love the American people.
Yeah.
The World Trade Center is ugly. Sorry, it's ugly. I'm just
gotta go
with the World Trade Center. That's it. It's not an act. Don't come back. Don't go looking for a thing like that. Don't escalate it, because I'm not going to do it anymore. It's gone. So it's gone. So I mean, that's the stupidity of the argument. People say, really, it's sometimes a common theme in the conversation. I say it never ceases to surprise me how stupid people are, and how these arguments resonate.
And it's the same people saying it's not war, it's a targeted strike. I would love to know how they'd be reacting if the Iranian military sent planes to bomb American government sites. Would that be an act of war, or would that just be a targeted strike and it's over and we should just be peaceful now? The time for peace is now. They just were at war with the American nuclear program, so it's all good now. They did what they had to do, and we can have peace now. Like the inanity of put yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's not that hard to imagine that this is an escalation of conflict. But it's like
people say we want the U.S. out of our region, so we love Americans that they stay in America. We don't want them invading our region, so we're going to attack Americans that are in the region that they should not be. But we're not at war. These are just targeted strikes. So you get out of our neighborhood. So go back to your neighborhood, and we'll leave you alone and stay out of our neighborhood. But it's not a war.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, that's the logic. It's the logic of people who I say this frequently, and my test of a reasonable person is someone who could be on the receiving message of anything that they say. They could also be the receiving message and think it's a reasonable statement.
Right.
But if you're saying something that you would think was unreasonable if you were the listener, okay, you're not a reasonable person, and you're not a reasonable person. So, so it's like what you say, you're equally indifferent between being the sayer of the words or the listener of those words, but you're equally indifferent because you think the words are reasonable words. Right. And if that's not the case, then you're not, then you don't meet my definition of a reasonable person.
Right.
So, so I tend to like to listen and acknowledge other people's perspectives. Doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but I like to listen, and I like to understand it.
Yeah.
So, because frequently it's not a matter about right or wrong. It's a matter of, us trying to understand each other as human beings. And maybe if we understand each other as human beings, we'll have more constructive relationships, and we'll be more likely to solve problems, if there's a will to solve problems,
Hmm.
if there's a really good faith will to solve problems. So I'm a big believer that if people have good faith, goodwill,
Yeah.
will put us the same energy to listening as talking,
Hmm.
then just about any problem can be solved. So, there might be difference in things like, I think this is worth $10 and you think it's worth $20. Those are difference of opinions, and no conversations will have you converge on whether it's worth $10 or $20. But you'll appreciate, I can understand why you think it's worth 10 and why I think it's worth 20, and we'll appreciate the fact that we have a different perception, of value.
Right.
But outside of that, when it comes to, engaging, I never really, I don't really like conflict, and I don't really understand conflict, because if you have conflict, you're generally, because either you're unreasonable or you're dealing with somebody else unreasonable. So if I'm unreasonable, I'm not happy that I'm unreasonable. And if I'm dealing with somebody unreasonable, then what's the point of dealing with somebody unreasonable? It's never going to produce something good.
Yeah.
So I think most conflict, if people just give a sense of really listening and really trying to understand each other, I think most things, can be solved. But we don't have the ability to do that, which means we really don't have the ability to be reasonable people. And I think that's a sad statement about humanity. So in these groups and on Twitter X, so what are the main arguments? What are people thinking of what's the next step? I mean, what are people thinking about now that we, quote, have a ceasefire? Are people trying to game out what they expect to happen next? Do you have any idea of what you think will happen next between Iran, Israel, and what role the U.S. will play in what will happen next?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say real quick that while you were speaking, there was a little earthquake just now. I don't know if you saw my dog's head go up, but the earth was actually shaking while you were speaking. I don't think there's going to be another. I'm a California native. I think that was it. But just in the event that like my screen starts shaking, that's an earthquake. I think we're okay. But that's actually, I think, so fitting given what we're talking about. It's what I see happening is I highly doubt the ceasefire holds. It's I think, what was it? I don't, did you see the clip of Trump just today? He was cursing. He basically just saying Israel broke the ceasefire within, I think, minutes of it being initiated, or when it was supposed to start. And Israel saying Iran broke the ceasefire, and Iran, as usual, it's the same thing over and over. And so for me, it's hard because I'm old enough to remember 9/11, and not a lot, but I do have a conscious memory of it. And so it seems like for as long as I have had a conscious memory, Iran has been the great evil. It's kind of like the neocon crown jewel. I'm sure you've seen the video of Wesley Clark speaking, recalling a conversation he had shortly after 9/11, saying that Iran was, on the list of countries that the US was going to invade and it was going to have war with. So on one hand,
at the axis of evil.
Right, of course. Yeah. And I was looking up that term, and they're still using it. This is still Iran, and what is it? Iran, China, and Russia. Is that the current axis of evil?
I don't know who the current is. So.
I know I can't keep up. But I think it's still them. And it's just interesting. I go back and forth because it's like, oh, they've been saying this forever.
I can tell you who the new axis of evil is. It's George Soros, Gavin Newsom, and Karen Bass. That's the
right. I know. They're not great. I'll say that much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like they've been crying wolf about Iran for so long. It's hard to imagine or conceive that it could actually lead to a full-blown war. But you look at the region, and it's one of those things where I studied history, and it's getting to the point where it's like, okay, you look back on all of these developments, and it seems like it wouldn't have been surprising, or it's not going to be surprising if something much bigger does pop off. I hope it doesn't, but it's really hard I don't like to make predictions, especially at stuff like this, because who knows? So this is all said with like, maybe, who am I to know or to be able to accurately predict? And I think that is one of the biggest problems I'm seeing in the discourse is people are so sure. They have to be certain. There's no room for uncertainty. And this goes from just the average social media commenter to people in power, where they speak in such absolute terms and they need to be the authority. They have to know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And you look at so many different conflicts, so many different upheavals. And I think that need for certainty drives so much of it. I mean, look at COVID. No matter what side you were on, whatever your perspective, it had to be 100% this is true. Either the vaccines are 100% going to kill you or they're 100% going to save you. And either, like it's, and on either side. And I mean, it's interesting because for me, this is a way of finding common ground of look at these underlying emotions. We're all actually feeling very similar emotions, and maybe they're driven by a different sensibility or a different perception of reality, but we're all still human and we're all having a lot of big feelings right now. And I think we ignore that at our own peril. And I think that the avoidance of these feelings, like there's a big, facts don't care about your feelings. And I agree. And I also think feelings don't care about facts. If you're caught in your feelings, you're not going to be able to hear facts. And I think that this rejection of feeling because it's like some dumb liberal thing, I think that's really quite misguided. Yes, liberals they can be quite emotional, but for me, I see them as not able to hold space for their feelings. And so they barf them out into the world and they demand that other people take responsibility for them instead of taking responsibility themselves. So this is not to say that I think feelings are the only thing that matter, but I think that a lot of people are very disconnected from them to the point where they don't even realize that they're terrified of the sleeper cells or Iran having a nuclear bomb. And they couch it in like, well, I'm tough and America's tough and we can't let this happen. But underneath, I think they're terrified. They're terrified of getting nuked. They're terrified. They still remember 9/11. And again, valid fears. I don't want to, like, of course you'd be afraid of something like that. But again, when that runs the show, you end up falling for some really harmful and destructive policies.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if I was Iran, I would be looking for a way of this. Clearly, the way we have sided with Israel, we're definitely a non-neutral actor. Sorry,
No worries.
I got my Angry Men. I like the song from Les Mis. Okay,
Nice.
That's me. I'm one of the things.
Oh, no way. Cool.
No, it's not me singing. I don't have that voice. I mean, saying I have sympathy for that song.
Got it.
I love the song. So for what it represents, right? And standing up for what's right, standing up for liberty. So and doing something about it.
Yeah.
So that's what I believe. So that reflects my belief system. That song. So anytime somebody calls me, I like listening.
Nice.
To the song. So I don't necessarily like answering the phone. I just like listening to the ring.
Just let it play through.
So, I think the Iran has all right to be suspicious of us. So there is not a neutral party that they could trust. And
Right.
what has been the evidence so far? The evidence has been that we did bad faith negotiations with them. Now, with respect to trying to come to a deal about the enrichment,
Yeah.
and like Merkel has announced that when they were negotiating with Russia and between Russia and Ukraine and those agreements, that they were bad faith negotiations, just negotiating in time.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you have just bad faith conversations? What do you do? So what should give confidence for Iran to take any risk whatsoever?
Yeah.
Clearly there's an asymmetry because it's not just that Israel's a nuclear power. Israel is a nuclear power backed by the top weapons of the U.S. and logistical support from the U.S. And what's evident to Iran today is that they can only rely upon themselves, and that's all they can have is to rely upon themselves. That to some extent they have some degree of friendship with China and Russia, but clearly the limits of that relationship is very different than the Israeli American.
Right.
And so there's a significant asymmetry there. So and I can see how Israelis say I don't think there's a credible threat of a Holocaust against Israel.
Right.
I don't really believe many Israelis, and I could be wrong, think any day now that Iran is going to strike them. I think that's just bullshit. I think this is just all about Israel wanting to be the sole hegemon in the region.
Yeah.
And then many of the other countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Kuwait, they all know that they're client states of the U.S.
Yeah.
So they know the U.S. is not going to allow conflict between those countries. So they don't worry about an existential threat. So the country that has the greatest existential threat in the region might be Iran.
Right.
And I think the evidence indicates that Iran has the greatest existential threat. We don't know. Trump says today, I don't want to do regime change, but tomorrow he could say, I want regime change.
Right. And I saw a clip actually, and it just speaks to one, what is even happening right now? How do you trust anything any of these people are saying? But when Israel was bombing Iran before the United States entered, they were saying, we have nothing to do with this. We're not helping. And then it became, oh, well, we provided logistical support and, we're helping shoot down the missiles. And it went from there's no involvement to actually like they were in on planning the airstrikes. And then in another instance, from what I'm seeing, and this is not verified, I'm trying to find more reliable information on it, but after saying that the nuclear facility was obliterated, now maybe it wasn't. Now maybe Iran had actually moved materials away from the nuclear facility, and maybe it's not obliterated, and maybe it's just a little bit damaged, but it's just like what is real or what is true is just shifting moment to moment. And that's why for me, it's really hard to get my bearings. And as someone who doesn't trust people in power, doesn't trust authority, it's like, not only is it trying to just make sense of what they're literally saying, because it changes so often, but then to try to assess, well, how much of this is true? How much of this is really based in reality?
The other thing is that Israel said, if Israel said the intent of the war was to get rid of the nuclear threat of Iran, then after the U.S. did the bunker buster, and Israel did all it did to destroy as much of the Iranians' capacity to commit aggression or to defend itself. I mean, really more to defend itself.
Yeah.
Then why did Israel continue bombing Iran after it? What were their objectives? Okay, clearly it had nothing to do. I mean, clearly they're doing a lot more than just targeting supposedly, Iranians' nuclear capabilities.
Yeah.
Or lack of capabilities.
Yeah.
So because they went and targeted more things completely unrelated to their nuclear weapons, more to weaken their ability to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And so the scope of the one day this is the objective, the next day something else the objective. And so they say what's convenient to justify their action that day. Yeah. So the only words they're using, they have no interest in the truth.
Right.
All they want to use is what's the words that can justify what I do today.
Yep.
Tomorrow I'll come up with different words to justify what I'm doing tomorrow. And the next day I'll come up with even a completely different set of words. I'll just always come up with the words that fit the argument, the narrative I want to tell. And I don't care whether those words are completely different than the day before. So because ultimately it's just about I can get away with those words because I have the power to do so.
Right. It's so much about the power. And it reminds me of, I really want to actually write something about this guy. I had a professor in college. He was an older Jewish man. He was a Czech Jew, and his parents died in the Holocaust, and he was hidden in a French Catholic church or something. His parents managed to get him out to France when he was a little boy. And he grew up and he became a historian of Nazi Germany and the Jews. The classes I took from him in college the class was called Nazi Germany, or it was like Third Reich and Jews. So he studied this. And before, I guess at the same time, he's like 90 something now, but he was very early into Israel. He was actually, I think, an assistant to a defense minister. His name's Saul Friedlander. You can look him up. He's written many books. But I remember being in that class in college, and he was getting to the point where he was like, look, I was a huge supporter of Israel, but my support started to change when I saw that they're intentionally crafting their national identity to be militaristic, to be tough, to be, and it was like an understandable psychological response of like, we're not going to get messed with anymore. There will never be another Holocaust. I understand that. But he really started to shift. He is no longer involved in that way. And he's actually very vocally critical of the state of Israel. But it really stuck with me and I was like 20 years old when I was hearing him talk, but I didn't know much about Israel at the time. And the way he spoke of the militarism and the really aggressive, intentionally crafted aggressive national identity, I think really informs how we see the government behaving today, like to this day. And I like reading what he has to say because I think he's more on the left. I think he went into like a Jewish peace movement, the two-state solution. I would not call myself on the left, but what I really appreciated was his ability to question his own biases, because he went from being wholeheartedly 100% supportive of the state of Israel, and for understandable reasons, to really starting to question it and look at, like, is this the behavior that aligns with my values? And for him, it wasn't. And he came out recently, and he's still a supporter of Israel. He's not an anarchist. Like, he's not, his goal in life is not to evolve past statism in government. No, that's fine. But he was still speaking of, like, this, something needs to be done, because Israel's creating its own destruction. The way they're behaving, or the people in power are behaving. Yeah, of course this is happening.
Yes, I agree. I think that there's a book I read when I was young, The Chosen, Chaim Patok, and it's about this relationship between an Orthodox kid and an ultra-Orthodox kid. And the ultra-Orthodox kid was the son of the rabbi, and there was an ultra-Orthodox sect that did not believe they were not Zionists. So they didn't believe that Judaism was tied to any piece of geography. That Judaism is being tied to the Torah and
right.
Talmud, and it's a conceptual thing, and it's not about geography. So and they thought that a Jewish state, with the problems that it has, with the Palestinians and the other people already living there, would be problems that would destroy the soul of Judaism. So what would make Israel strong would make Judaism weak. And so their focus was on being a good Jew, not being a good Israeli. Right. And they thought basically you have to choose that, that the better Israeli you are, probably the worse Jew you are, because you're not living according to, the Torah and Talmud. So, my first exposure was after the 6-Day War. We took a class field trip to the UN, and just so happened that day in the UN, they were dealing with the fact that the tomb of the patriarchs, where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are buried, and their wives, it's in Hebron. What the Palestinians had done with those was they were very dirty, and they made latrines out of them. So I'm listening to this. I'm listening to the Jordanian ambassador asking for Israel to be condemned, and then I have the Israeli ambassadors taking pictures and showing, before and after. Here are latrines. This is stuff. This is the third holiest site for Jews. And we cleaned it up. And that's all we did, is we got rid of the latrines and we cleaned it up. We knew this would be a problem, so we made sure we took before and after photos. So this is all we've done. And here are all these beautiful bathrooms that we've made available. So we made all these public bathrooms so that the people would have something even better than latrines, and we would have access to that. And Israel got condemned. And so anyway, so I go back to, my teacher, and then my parents, and then my rabbi, and I say, why do they hate us so much? Because I'm a kid. Just this argument doesn't make sense. There was so much evidence, and the evidence was not disputed. It was the Jordanian ambassador basically said, well, what's a latrine to you is a landmark to us. So they didn't dispute that they were latrines. They didn't dispute any of the photos. They just said those latrines are our landmarks.
Right.
So and I just said, this is who listens to this argument and takes this argument, and then to see Israel get condemned. How can you have a jury decide, that the facts against condemning Israel for this holy site, where then they made sure it's not like the people there were deprived of bath services. They now were given better toilets. So what's the complaint? So so that made me think about, that made me say, I want to be a supporter of Israel.
Right.
And I went over to Israel quite a few times, but the more time I spent there, the less supportive I became of Israel. And I'm very sympathetic to the fact that there is the Palestinian people see no path to a better life.
Yeah.
Clearly these Bibi has made a career of sabotaging any hope
Yeah.
that Palestinians have for any degree of real autonomy. So what do people resort to when you dealt with a party that's they resort to using the tactics that Shamir and Begin used to get rid of the British, right? I mean, so they use
Right.
same tactics.
Right.
They use the same tactics that George Washington used to get rid of the British, also.
Yeah.
So they say the loser is a terrorist, and the winner is a freedom fighter.
Right.
But when there's an asymmetry, we just don't take a look at the fact that an asymmetry exists. And if you're in their circumstances, what
Yeah.
would you do? That
Right.
people just can't seem to put themselves in the position, of the other person and say,
Right.
what do? You have no voice. You have this monster that has nuclear weapons. They're the most well-trained army, the well-tripped army. They get all the support from the U.S. They get more aid than any other country from the U.S. Military aid and assistance. And here you are and say, what are you doing? These people are not having a serious conversation about how you can live together. And when the history has been that you have lived together for a long period of time, through most of history, you live together in peace.
Yeah.
So why can't we have a one-state solution? Why can't we have a solution where everybody has their rights and they live in regular peace and hope and everything like that? I'm sure if there's goodwill in a conversation, I'm sure the problem will be solved. Unfortunately, there's an absence of goodwill, and maybe there's so much distrust because there's an absence of goodwill. That maybe it's harder to bridge that trust. But I think those who said that maybe the idea of a Jewish state and Zionism is a bad concept for Jews, I think history has proven them to be right.
Yeah.
So as a Jew, I wish Israel didn't exist. I don't want to see Israel destroyed, so I don't want any Jew to accuse me that I'm advocating for the destruction of Israel. So even though I had a conversation with Ariel Sharon once, and I said to him, I said, what my idea is? My idea is this. It's a pipe dream, but I said, I think that every country in the world should offer citizenship to every Jew in Israel, that there should be whatever businesses or whatever people have that they, to move out, people have a bunch of assets in place. They have homes, they have jobs, things like that. So there's got to be an amount of money. But if you look at all the trouble the region has, I think the whole world could come together, and buy out every Jewish business, finance the Palestinians to buying up all those businesses, making sure there's fair money for all that, for their homes, for their assets, for the inconvenience, and just offer them citizenship to any country they want to go to, as long as they're not a criminal.
Right.
If they're a criminal, they have to stay and be in jail. As long as they're not a criminal, they should be able to go anywhere in the world. The world should finance this. In other words, give them value for the net worth they've accumulated there. So they're not ceding all that they worked their lives for. And some of them could even stay if they want to stay. So if those that want to stay and live in a democratic regime, there, and they want to stay and they don't mind living with the Palestinians. Many might choose to even stay and keep their businesses, and might find that that everybody's getting along reasonably well. So to me, that's my proposal for the solution, because I don't see this having a happy ending.
No.
Whether a nuclear power might delay the inevitable and might delay it for a long period of time, but I think it's inevitable. This region will always be, a toxic zone. You can't force yourself, on people, and you can't force yourself on people who you've deprived of rights for years, as Israel has deprived people. So since 1967, how many years it's we're going on 60 years of people having no hope. and that's just too long for any period of any people. It's not fair to them, and and I think the world, if they had some creativity, that's my idea. Maybe I'm sure somebody can come up with an even a better idea, than my idea. Sharon actually thought it was clever. He says not going to happen, but he said he thought it was a clever idea. But I think those who were the Jews that were anti-Zionist at the time of the voting for the creation of the state of Israel, and like Einstein was one of them.
Yeah.
I think they've proved to be more prescient, in understanding. And I think even many people who were there at the founding, if they were alive today and looked at it, I think they'd be appalled. So then I think the Israel they hoped they would live with, I think they would be appalled at seeing the Israel today. So I even the founders that had good intentions, that maybe there was a way of coexisting. I don't think they would like to see, as you described, this militaristic, state. So that really has nothing to do, other than the fact that about 60% or 65% of the population are Jewish, but has nothing to do with really Judaism.
Right.
So the values of Judaism are very, very different.
Right.
That they're embedded, as I said, the Torah and the Talmud, not in a piece of land. So it's very, very sad. Now you're in where in California are you?
I'm in Los Angeles, right in the belly of the beast.
So tell me, what was? Did you feel safer the day the Marines showed up?
This is so funny. So every time something happens in Los Angeles, I realize that the rest of the country has no idea what Los Angeles is like. So, and if you listen to just the mainstream headlines, it's, oh, Los Angeles erupts in chaos. Oh, the streets are on fire. No, it's a small little section downtown, and it wasn't great. Like, it's obviously like, no, we don't like rioters and looters. I'm not condoning that behavior, but the languaging of like, we're going to come liberate me from what? You could not tell any difference from another Sunday in Los Angeles. And if you were downtown, for sure, yes. But as far as I'm aware, this was so much less expansive. It covered so much less literal service area than, say, like the Rodney King riots in the 90s or the George Floyd protests in 2020. And that, I think National Guard was also sent in 2020. It was so much worse when that happened. So to say that the Marines need to be sent in for this tiny little patch in downtown LA where the police are already so militarized, SWAT, I think, was in a large part developed with LAPD. I could have my history wrong. It's been about a decade since I looked into that. But from what I recall, the LAPD was perfectly equipped to handle this. It was a show of force. It was an opportunity that the administration took to, for them, it was like perfect political capital because their base hates California. They hate Gavin Newsom. They hate illegal immigration. And you throw that all together in Los Angeles, and this was the perfect PR opportunity for the Trump administration, and they took it. And to my dismay, people were so excited about having the Marines do law enforcement that it just seems like that was not something that should have been taken lightly or done for the level of protest that was occurring at the time.
Now, I didn't remember watching, and maybe because I'm not watching 24/7 the news. I mean, I was paying some attention to what's going on in LA because my daughter and my grandchildren are there, so I was following it.
Yeah.
So, and just out of general interest, you want to follow it,
Yeah.
but I don't remember many places where somebody, or seeing an article from the Washington Post or New York Times where somebody said, "Here's the map of LA, and this is where, and this is where the little bit of violence. This is where it is." To give you a perspective, you would assume that somebody would do that.
You would, right? Yeah. And it was the same thing with the fires as well. All the sensational headlines, it was like LA burns, LA's on fire. No, it was not good. The areas that were destroyed, it was really devastating. And I don't want to downplay what people went through. But again, the entire city was not on fire. There were plenty of just giant swaths, many cities that did not burn. And it was crazy for a couple of weeks there, but it was not how it was portrayed. And then it just makes me wonder, like, how many things that are reported And it's like, you don't know what you don't know. If you're someone in Missouri watching the news in Los Angeles and you don't know the layout of the city, you don't know that you don't know. So it's hard to be able to discern. And it always like gives me an extra layer of skepticism of like, what don't I know in what any given story that I'm reading and consuming? What am I not aware of that might completely change the context?
So right now, is it from what I've read, the National Guard that's under the control of Trump, and the Marines that are also under the control of Trump, obviously, that they're basically at around just a few federal buildings, and they're just hanging out in front of those buildings, making sure nobody goes into those buildings?
That's what it seems to be. I was down by UCLA, which is West Los Angeles, which is about, I don't know, I'd say 18 minutes to downtown without traffic. With traffic, you don't even want to know. But the West LA, I was driving, there's a lot of federal buildings there. There's an FBI building, there's a federal cemetery, I think it's a Spanish American War cemetery of all the wars, to just have a random cemetery in LA. But I drove past the federal building and it was just lines of military, like fully armed, standing there. And there was no visible threat. I mean, the protests had died down. There's usually protests on that street. It's Wilshire Boulevard. In West LA, Westwood. And there weren't even protesters there. And they were all just standing there, like twiddling their thumbs, except they're holding their guns. So, maybe not literally twiddling their thumbs, but I did notice that was maybe a week ago. I haven't been back there since, but it was a little bit eerie to see just soldiers in LA, just like guarding a random building. That's something I haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's very disappointing to me that the courts have allowed.
Yes, I saw that.
I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be the type of threat that justified.
No.
They decided to. The courts say, well, we'll defer to the judgment of the press. Why would anyone watching Trump's behavior, for as long as they watch Trump's behavior, think he's operating in good faith? Right. So why would you want to give him the benefit of the doubt? Yeah. So this is a guy, and I saw that when they asked, I don't remember who they asked this question to, but the question was about, what about, because the story that Trump had during the summer of riots around the country after Floyd, that he had given instructions, and I think he either said he's denied it or he was just kidding that they should start shooting people in the leg. But several people have said that he said it. Yeah. So he's still not denying it. But I bet you a lot of people who know him probably think he probably said it. So right.
Well, and he commented right before the military parade. He made a comment of like, if there's any protesters, you're going to be met with force. And he didn't say violent protesters. He didn't say,
yes.
It was across the board protests. And I don't know what actually happened with the protests there.
Just like you spit, we hit, and we hit harder. So that's illegal. So I checked the law on what's proper police procedure. If somebody spits at a cop, and beating them is not legal. Right. So that would cause that person who got beat would have a civil lawsuit against the city. So, but I'm sure Trump would be happy to pay off those civil lawsuits.
Well, right. Isn't he getting some law firms? He has some arrangement where they're going to be representing police officers pro bono.
Something like that. Yes. No matter what they do. So, and how are people so you're basically saying, were people from Los Angeles, did they feel safer after Trump federalized the National Guard? So
not that I'm aware of. I don't know of anyone who felt safe. I don't know of anyone who felt unsafe before. It's a lot of, and again, like, I'm not condoning looting and rioting. That's not okay. It's not okay to hurt people. It's not okay to take their stuff. I don't like everything I'm saying is said with that very major caveat, but like, it's Los Angeles, man. People riot when the Lakers win the national championship. Like, they don't call in the National Guard. It's Los Angeles is a big city and there's a lot of rowdy people here. This is just, and maybe I'm desensitized to it because I'm from here. This is how it is. Sometimes there are protests and sometimes they get rowdy, and no, not okay to hurt people. But like, do you really want to go down that road of calling in the military to police protests. This is, to me, it signals danger. I'm much more concerned about the military being used for domestic law enforcement than I am the short-term consequences of some people acting poorly, which again, not great. Like I just want to be really clear, not okay. But the reason I'm clarifying it so much is the general response from the people who support bringing in the military is, well, it's just thugs and looters. What are you going to do? You got it. As long as I can demonize these people, then it's okay to shut down protest. It's okay to police all that. Because I think it was, Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, she was saying, well, the majority of protesters are violent. That's absurd. That's just absolutely not. I'm from LA. I can tell you there aren't that many tough people here. Like there are some people who will go crazy. A lot of the people out there are just liberals who want to feel good and feel like they made a difference, and they wouldn't know how to be violent. If they had to be, they wouldn't know how to be violent. And sure, people are out there throwing tantrums and they're raging, and it's kind of unmitigated reactivity, and that's true. But what are you talking about? The majority of people are violent. That's just an outrageous claim. But when you say stuff like that, well, then the base goes, well, then of course we have to police it with the military. I'm scared. I don't like it. These people I hate are doing things I don't like. So send in the men with guns.
Yes, very, very, very sad. And California, there's, good or bad, whatever people think about California is probably the easiest state to get rid of a public official you don't like. So you don't need Kristi Noem to coming in and liberating people. You have recalls. We people have been recalled from public office in California. So California's the people who understand the rights that they have to remove people prior to their expiration of their term in office.
Right.
It's called a recall. They've exercised their rights of key recall. They understand they have the right of recall. So if they want to be liberated, they know how to liberate themselves.
Right.
They don't need help from Kristi Noem.
Right.
To liberate themselves.
Yeah. And I do wish there was more desire to break out of the Democratic supermajority here. Like that's its own issue, that people will just vote Democrat straight down the ticket no matter what. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think it's been helpful, but I also don't think you need the military to come in and police a protest. So it's hard to be outside the left-right paradigm, as I'm sure you can understand.
Well, yes, but you and I more towards, I'm a self-described anarcho-capitalist, anarchist, and you're more libertarian.
I use the A word, that's for sure. I'm much more an A word than an L word.
So for us, nobody wants to listen to us really. So
right.
we don't get equal time on the news. So when people are taking a look at, oh gee, I'm throttled or shadow banned. I don't think if you're not a Democrat or Republican, you're hated by 99% of the people in the country. So maybe the most oppressed group of people, are people like you and I for our political lives, because we determine we don't want to be a member of any tribe. So it makes you the enemy if you don't want to be. You're either with me or against me.
Right. Exactly.
No difference,
And that brings us full circle to what we were talking about. It's so much of the us versus them mentality that it just, like, what I see that as is just gives more and more power to the people who know that there isn't really that much division, but they'll stoke it in order to amass more power for themselves. You create that other, and this is like throughout human history. If you can find an outside threat, somebody who's not in your in-group, and they're bad and they're evil, what will you give up to battle that threat? And it's such a fixation on the negativity rather than the positivity of like, well, what do I have in common with these people? I actually have quite a lot in common with these people, far more than I have with these people in Congress or these bureaucrats or these lobbyists or this president, any president. But it's the people in power benefit from you forgetting that, not you, but the people forgetting that.
Right. So what are the other things that you're inspired to write about, talk about, interact? What are the other topics that you find interesting today?
Yeah, well, I'm getting back. There's been so much news cycle stuff that I haven't had as much creative space to just talk about anarchism. So I'm working on some videos that are much more just like straight to the anarchist philosophy, which I always love doing. I kind of made a decision maybe 6 years ago to talk about that more openly, instead of just talking about, well, the two-party system sucks. And it does. And I think that's so important to talk about. But I think the philosophy of it is so important, because we can talk about who did that and who did what, and that they're corrupt and they took this money and, and they'd give that favor. Sure. And that's important. But for me, all of that is just to serve the broader purpose of evolution of consciousness, which for me, ideally, is away from violent authority and the monopoly on force and structuring society in this way. Because it's like every place we're talking about, every issue we've talked about today, what's the common denominator? Oh yes, violent authority and government. And they don't see it's not getting better. I don't see them, resolving issues that have been long-standing. So I'm always excited to talk about that. And I wrote a really fun one for my Substack about Mark Twain, because he was actually a huge anti-imperialist, which is somewhat known but not very widely known in the Mark Twain mythology, because he's such an American hero. He's such an icon. He was beloved in his time. He's beloved now, but it's far less known that he was really forcefully anti-imperialist. And there's a great
So.
What was that?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. So I got to write about just one of his. It was actually an essay that he declined to publish until after his death because he was afraid it was going to be too upsetting for people.
The war prayer.
Yep, that's the one.
Yes, when people were celebrating our very successful mission of obliterating everything we wanted to obliterate,
yes,
and more, I sent out to a number of people a copy of Twain's War Prayer.
Nice.
So, because yes, people. So far yet, people have not called him a commie and a radical left lunatic. They might be any day soon. I mean,
right.
Who knows if Miller knew that Twain wrote this, who knows what Miller would be calling.
Right. He just hated America.
So, so you wrote about that. So I guess about the same time I was sending out.
Yeah.
You wrote about it.
Yeah.
So what was your Substack that you wrote on it?
Yeah, it's my most recent one. It was just because he had referred to it reportedly as sacrilegious. And what the essay is really about is putting on full display and laying bare the real realities of war. And yes. He was juxtaposing this new American patriotism that was very jingoistic, very pro-war, imperialistic. This was when the United States was occupying the Philippines and they had been involved in the Spanish-American War. And there was this new fusion of not just country with war and patriotism with war, but of religion and God. And America, I think, was at least, it's hard to say. I think it was more openly Christian back then. There was still a much stronger Christian focus. And this essay is all about what people are really praying for when they're praying for the troops, because they're praying for victory. But what does that mean for the opponents? If your team wins, who's dying on the other side? And it was really, I mean, it's just like a smackdown of the pro-war mentality. And his daughter read it and she was like, I don't think you should publish this now. It's too much. The people can't handle it. And to me, what's the most telling is that back then, even though the pro-war mentality was really starting to blossom and spread, people, it was too scary for them to hear the realities of it, of like, oh, well, this actually means that there are going to be a bunch of widows and homeless children and flesh blown apart on meadows. I'm paraphrasing here, but he was like, that's too much. People can't handle it. I think today I look at the rhetoric, the way people talk about destroying other human beings and how they revel in it and they celebrate it. It shows, unfortunately, what he was warning about, it just kept getting worse. What he was pointing to and noticing and trying to steer people away from, I think it's just snowballed. And I'm not saying that everyone who thinks it was a good idea to strike Iran, revels in the idea of bloodshed. It's not that, but I think this collective consciousness there's a lot more tolerance for that kind of brutality, and there's room to view it as a good thing. Whereas back then, the masses, even though they were feeling kind of pro-war, they didn't take joy in that. And now there's at least some people who really do, and it's very disturbing.
Well, clearly a lot of people did take joy, because I read that the LA police force sent condolences to some of the people who died in Iran as a result of these strikes.
Oh, really?
And then had to retract it because people thought that didn't like the fact that sympathy was expressed to Iranian victims of the Israeli attacks and our attack.
Yeah.
So we're not supposed to have sympathy that every Iranian who died deserved to be dead.
Right.
And we are celebrating them all that are dead. So and we don't feel any sense of condolences because none of them are innocent victims.
Right.
So this is very, very Very, very sick. But it's the same type of logic when I speak to people. And again, I don't want to say September 11th wasn't a horrible event. Clearly it was a horrible event, but for many countries, they live under September 11th every day of their lives
Right.
from us, and we don't have. When we had the sanctions regime against Iraq, and Madeleine Albright was asked about the 500,000 kids that died from malnutrition and other things because of our sanctions. So what? So somehow, we're all human beings. Why is the death of an American worse than the death of anyone else? Why should anyone die, in a violent manner? Why is it okay for certain people to commit violence against others, and others, and others not? So, everyone who dies is a tragedy in the world. Everyone who dies, not through natural causes, is a terrible thing. And I guess, I don't understand how even people consider themselves religion, whatever religion you are, whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or any other religion, thinks that if you believe in a monotheism, which the three religions believe in monotheism, one God, why do they think God has a preference of seeing some people dead?
Right.
So why would God have that preference? So it doesn't seem to be. God, I know you like me better than I'm your favorite God.
Right.
Person, because I'm your favorite.
It reminds me of the Bob Dylan song "With God on Our Side." That's one of my favorite Dylan songs. I don't know if you know it, but it's one of his classics, just kind of summarizing. And this is from an American exceptionalism point of view. I understand it's not just America that has the exceptionalism, but it's kind of like Mark Twain in a sense of just juxtaposing this beautiful religious language with death and carnage, and somehow like rationalize it or like believing the two are compatible.
Yeah. Do you remember the debate for the presidential debate that Ron Paul participated in? I think it was at the Reagan Library or something like that. And when he said, his foreign policy would be basically the golden rule, and he got booed.
Yes.
We don't want to treat people the same way we expect to be treated.
Yeah.
So we want to be treated exceptionally, and we want to treat people like shit. So
right, exactly.
We certainly don't think anyone else deserves the same level of treatment as we deserve.
Yeah.
So where does this come? This is why I really don't like the fact "Make America." We should make the planet great. We should make
right.
Great. We should make human beings great. We should believe in humanity. The nation state is an artificial construct.
Right.
And it's an artificial construct founded based upon force. Every boundary has been defined. The U.S. to some extent is an exception because at least we created a constitution where the majority of the people consented to a certain form of government. But then we took other people because we forgot that we were actually illegal. We were actually immigrants here, and there were people here before us, and they haven't done so well. The people before us, the Native Americans. We signed a lot of treaties with them. We didn't keep any of the treaties with them.
Right.
We just, I like the episode of Seinfeld where he's at a rent-a-car person, and he said, "I made a reservation, but the car wasn't there." And so he's telling the agent, he said, "Look, anybody can make a reservation. I just write a reservation. The point is not the taking of the reservation, it's holding the reservation." So, so that's the whole point, is holding the reservation. So anybody can sign a treaty. The point is keeping the treaty.
Right.
So we violated a lot of treaties. So we came in, and we had people who were hospitable to a point until we decided, we wanted what they had, and we were and more of us were coming, and we were gonna take it over. And when they were getting in the way of our manifest destiny, we had to figure out, how to take care of them.
Right. And
So
they're the savages. They're the uncivilized ones. And we got to
right,
civilize
yeah,
them through force.
exactly, exactly. That's right. We're the civilized ones.
Right.
They were the civilized ones. So not us. I mean,
Right.
maybe they don't meet. Maybe they didn't have the same book knowledge as we had. Maybe they didn't have the same ability to build things as we had. But they seem to have been more civilized than us. And we're not a very. If we're resolving conflict with force,
Yeah.
you can't be civilized.
Right.
Civilized people don't need force.
Right.
Civilized people resort to conversation, dialogue, debate, discussion.
Yeah.
Civilized people believe in the non-aggression principle.
Right.
Civilized people don't believe you solve any conflict by killing the other person.
Right.
So so these are just uncivilized acts.
Yeah.
Now, but people, I guess, in Twitter land, X land, whatever, they don't seem to ascribe to that point of view that there's any relationship between nonviolence and civilization.
No, it's really quite remarkable, the lack of self-awareness on social media. And I know that this is just a small section of the population, but like the things that come out of people's mouths, I'm like, oh, you're not there. Like you've got a mind virus that is taken over, because it's the same people saying like, we are the protectors of civilization. They're saying turn Gaza into a parking lot, turn it to glass. I'm like, I don't know if those two statements go together. Like I am civilized and I would like to completely obliterate an entire people, and they deserve it. I mean, it's hard for me to reconcile. And it comes back, like you're saying, we don't solve problems through force. I look at all these conflicts and it's the statism. People love to say, well, it's the Jews. The reason this is happening is Jews. Jews are inherently evil and they're inherently that. Like, well, I feel like you could say that about any group of people, but give them a government and they're for sure going to do bad things. It doesn't matter what they believe or what their ancestry is. If you give people power, this is a bit of a human thing. Chances are it's going to get corrupted and they're going to abuse it and they're going to get addicted to how good it feels to lord over other people. And to me, this is not a Jewish thing. This is a government thing. And that's why I make the content I do. I'd really like, to me, that's the root. The branches are, this issue or that issue, but the real root of it is this conditioned belief that we need violent authority and coercion to be civilized. Like it just sounds so, once you break out of this belief, it sounds absolutely absurd, but I used to believe it. So I understand.
Well, even if people believe, I mean, I can say the argument for those that want to blame the Jews is, to the extent that Jews can be successful at the strategy, is being able to manipulate government to accomplish their objectives.
Right, exactly.
So if you want to take power away from Jews, decentralize government.
Exactly.
Then the Jews can't gang up and corrupt an institution, because the institution doesn't exist that could be corrupted. And so if you really believe that the Jews control the deep state and the Jews control government, very simple solution: support these complete decentralization.
Yeah.
It's like I say in when I try and explain to people Bitcoin, I say you can own almost every single Bitcoin, okay, which is not really possible, but let's say you could, okay, and you'd still have no influence over Bitcoin.
Right.
You can't change its attributes. So owning coins does not get you influence. It might make you wealthier, but you don't have any more influence over the system. So so people should so anyone who doesn't like Jewish control over the banking system, buy Bitcoin. Jews have no control over Bitcoin. There's nothing they can do to debase its value. They can't create more Bitcoins, okay, because it's defined by an algorithm, okay, and that's and it can't be altered. So anyone who doesn't like Jews and think Jews have too much power, best way to dilute the power of Jews is to become an anarchist or a libertarian or a minarchist, and the less the government can do, the less money the resources have, the less control government has over the influence over the money supply, then you've basically taken away all the ability that you think Jews have to control your life. And therefore they have now diluted, Jewish power over you. And so they should all be our allies in a decentralized world. So, it's a shame that more people are looking at, which I think is why I think human beings are as groups too pathetic. Is they're looking for government to solve problems.
Yeah.
And this is part of what you talk about, is that you got to look at yourself for solving problems. You can't look toward the government to be the solution to a problem. Most of the problems you got to confront and deal with yourself. And the expectation is that nobody has an obligation to solve your problem for you, and nobody has an obligation to subsidize you. That you have, responsibilities for yourself, and that's what was the foundation of this country. Was, the expression I like to use is, that basically previously we had sovereign nations populated by subjects, and the U.S. became a confederation populated by sovereign individuals. So, what sovereignty didn't reside in the state, sovereignty resided in the individual, and that was the unique concept of America. Was the idea of the sovereign individual.
Mhm.
We were not subjects. Okay, we were self-sovereigns. Everywhere else around the world, people were subjects, subjected to the king. So we were not subject to the king. We had a government that was subject to us, not the reverse. So that was the unique thing about America. And many of the founders talked about America as being an idea.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the matter of here's a piece of land and this piece of land is. No, it was a specific idea. It was a philosophical framework, and they hoped everybody embraced that framework, and anybody who embraced that framework was welcome to come and share it, with all the people, in our country, because they really didn't see it that way as a nation state. That's why they said no. They didn't want a sitting army, a standing army. That there was just a requirement that people were supposed to take care of their own self-protection through being part of militias, and the real militias were regulated militias. So, and everybody was expected to be part of the militia. Every male, every able male, unless you were in certain professions, had an obligation to get their muskets and know how to shoot. And when they were called up, they were expected to do the service, and they all had their ranks in their militias. And when the War of 1812 happened, the militias got called up. We didn't have much of an army, a national army. We had militias. So in the Civil War, it was mostly militias from the various states, that fought each other. Very sad that it was us versus ourselves.
Yeah.
But there was no real standout. There was just a bunch of. That's why it was the Michigan Regiment and this regiment, because everything was United States.
Yeah.
And then we didn't have much of a standing army in World War I or World War II. We didn't have much. We were able to produce the weapons that we needed pretty quickly and get people trained. And we showed we did a pretty good job of it without having a full-time professional army. So we did a pretty good job of keeping ourselves safe and secure from the world. Without having, a standing army.
Right.
And we really don't need it. So it's sad that we can't even have this conversation. When people take a look at, when we think of going back, we started in the Middle East. What's our experience in the Middle East? We went into Iraq. How did that work out? Anyone think Iraq was a success? Then we went into Afghanistan to prevent the Taliban takeover, and then we ended up giving the Taliban Afghanistan. So we spent a lot of money to leave Afghanistan. We left both countries in worse shape than we left it. Saddam Hussein was really not an enemy of the American people.
Right.
Now Iraq is certainly no friends, of the American people.
Yeah.
So where in Syria. I guess now we have somebody who used to be Al Qaeda or wherever, who's now running Syria.
Mm-hmm.
So Libya, I don't know if anyone's really running it.
Right.
So where can we go where we created this democratic haven that has tremendous prosperity and people are living in peace and security? Where that we've intervened has that outcome been?
Right.
So why should we have any confidence that any intervention on our part is going to produce something good? So we got to look realistic. We lost the Vietnam War. we lost. Since World War II, we lost North Korea. We lost Vietnam. You know, who knows how you would define Iraq?
Yeah.
We definitely lost Afghanistan. Maybe our only victory was in the Reagan administration with Grenada.
Right.
When we took those students out. So we rescued those students. So I don't remember how many students there were, but at least that was a successful operation. But maybe it was successful because it had a very limited target. We went in
Right.
there,
Exactly.
took the students out. We didn't do nation building. We didn't do anything. We just went in with a very limited objective. Let's get the students out, and then let them do what they want to do. So, I mean, I'm sure you bring these arguments up with people because you're a very bright person. What kind of response do you get from people when you're trying to have, conversations about the disutility of violence?
It's interesting. They tend to agree. It's like they can hear it in the abstract. They can hear it in conversation. But the second there's an election, it's like, well, but I got to go vote. What else am I going to do? And I was just having this conversation with someone actually who hates Donald Trump, leans liberal, leans to the left. And they're like, well, but what can we do? Like, I was so glad you asked. There's actually so many solutions. And at the core of it is decentralization and self-sufficiency. And that's not like, I mean, I come at it with an anti-government perspective, but it doesn't need to be anti-government. At this point, this is just practical. Look at the nature of the government. Look at how it's doing. How are its programs really serving people? Oh, they're not. Okay, so it might be a good idea to start building that infrastructure from a voluntary place at a community level where the people you're concerned about being harmed by, say, Trump's budget cuts will have others who can help them. It doesn't all need to be top down. It doesn't need to come from the state. It doesn't need to be violently organized, because if these are things you care about, and there are a lot of people who do care about it, then you actually do have the power to organize and to make these things happen voluntarily, decentralized. And I think it speaks to how programmed people's minds are that this does not compute. This is not really considered an option. But I think that if the people who are so upset, say about Donald Trump specifically, if they took all that energy they spend hating Donald Trump and raging about Donald Trump, and they took it and they put it into helping other people, I think that would be a lot more beneficial to humanity than getting caught in the theater of politics. Because to me, it's just theater. You see Donald Trump laughing with Barack Obama at Jimmy Carter's funeral, or having a grand old time, or with Chuck Schumer. Like, are we still buying into this? This is theater. And to what extent is it actually like theater and staged and scripted? I don't know. Like, I would never claim to have any idea. But when you see Trump talking about the evil Democrats and Chuck Schumer, and then you see him laughing with Chuck Schumer, I don't know. It seems like maybe your energy would be better spent helping the people that you're so upset about being harmed by the Trump administration. Like, address it directly then. Stop voting for people who are going to maybe challenge it. Probably not. Like, it's like the No Kings March. It's like, well, no kings, but we're okay with, a technocratic police state and a continual war. That's whatever. That's better than a king. So that's as far as I need to go. I'll just vote for somebody else. And again, it's like coming back to that outsourcing your agency, of expecting other people to do it for you when really they've created the problems. I mean, to me, it's just such an incessant loop. But again, that's why I make these videos, because I think this message matters. And I think if more people heard it and heard it enough, and then maybe there'd be more people willing to do something differently. And over time, I don't think it's going to be tomorrow, but I think over time, when people start taking more responsibility for themselves, at some point, the state can't feed off our energy anymore and our resources, because they're going elsewhere. We're not letting them feed off our energy and resources and time and like literally our resources, our money, because people maybe choose to put it somewhere else. And if there were, a mass tax resistance, maybe something would change, but we're not there yet. So.
Yeah, I wonder what would happen if there was a mess, if there was just a tax boycott.
Yeah.
I wonder, I know Newsom talked about, which was a stupid thing to say, they'll deprive the federal government of the money, but the reality is it's not like California's collecting money on behalf of the federal government and sending it to them. I guess the only way they might be doing that is a sales tax. Like, where they collect the sales tax, and it has its local, federal, and local, state, and federal components. And I guess they're holding on to that, and then dispersing it, to the various claimants against it. But people's income tax. But it'd be nice if states, but I'd like to see if it was legal. And so if it's not legal, I don't want to advocate for it because I don't want to say I'm advocating for it legal, but I wish it was legal that you could that the taxpayers paid into their state government their federal income tax, and that the any IRS agents had to be or any federal agent that came into the state had to register with the state, and therefore, if a state didn't like what the federal government was doing, they would just not give any money to the federal government, and therefore, when the federal government tried to enforce its claims against money against people from a state, they'd find that the states would not let them enforce it, and let this time let when the IRS agent comes, let the local police arrest them and send them to South Sudan.
Right.
So
deported.
And see them, and then saying national security, we can't negotiate with a foreign country. They're there. They don't want to send them back. Too bad. So that would be. I don't know why more states don't try and form really blocks of like free trade zones and stuff like that, where they can actually dilute the power of the federal government, when they think a federal government's hostile to their interests. I don't know why states have not done a better job of forming their own confederation of states, where they can create some preferential rules trading amongst and between themselves. So maybe we'll start seeing more innovations in governance over time as, when the government starts defaulting on more of its obligations to us. So on the previous conversation, I was speaking with one of my friends, and if the current forecast for Social Security, running out of money to pay everyone 100 cents on the dollar, is 8 years from now, and then they think the discount will be about 23 cents. So let's say 10 years from now, people got to only getting 75 cents on the dollar. People who have no savings, let's see. He thinks that it'll be easy to get the funding to fund that difference. I'm not so sure about that because it's a trust fund, as I was explaining to him, which he already understood, but I had to remind him, and that basically the trust fund had to be funded by the people. So the people would have to agree to either not fund it and therefore reduce benefits, or people would have to agree to fund more. And basically the people who have to fund it more would be people who have to put up more money to pay for other people who are not funding it anymore, receiving more money. And you might find that, there's a difference between voting to cut people's benefits or agreeing to pay more taxes to keep people's benefits from being cut, that will be cut because of statutory reasons. And the fact is that the entity that pays them out just has no money, and they would have to put more money into it. I'm not so sure that people will vote. They have to see how much money they'll have to pay to fund the existing claimants who decided to ignore all the warnings their whole life by saying, it's running out of money, and they're saying, I don't care. Many people think it's government's promise to me. It's not government's promise. It's a trust fund where you funded it, and the only recourse is to that trust fund. And if people are too stupid to understand that, they only have themselves to blame for it. So, and unfortunately, too many people are too stupid, to understand, or I saved it. It's my money. No, I tell people that look at the amount of money you put in, figure out how much of the balance is accreted, given the fact that it's been reinvested in treasuries, and you can figure out what your balance is. And then the question is, are you collecting more than you paid in, or less? If everyone was paying more than paid in, it wouldn't be bankrupt. Running out of money because people put up less to pay the benefits that they were hoping to get. And if they were paying less, then they're relying on other people to fund their retirement. And why should anybody else fund somebody else's retirement? So right now, the younger generation will have to figure out how to pay off our $36 trillion fiscal deficit, $200 trillion unfunded liabilities, and at the same time have enough money left over to fund their retirement. This is what the boomer generation has done. My generation has done. I call it the worst generation. So, but maybe the generation after me will be even worse than my generation.
There's always hope.
So, what other things would, before we call a conclusion to this conversation? Really, it's really nice speaking with you. I really enjoy the work you do very, very much, and I hope you get more and more exposure. So, what are the things that you'd like to leave as the, last words to the people who will watch this this podcast?
Yeah, well, I've already confessed that I'm from California, so I'll lean into that and just say, maybe it sounds like hippie and woo woo, but I think now, I mean, always, but especially now, like, take care of yourself if you can, whatever that means to you. You don't have to sit on a meditation cushion and do your ohms, like, for whatever feels right to you. Maybe that's time in nature, maybe it's exercising, maybe it's just being with your family, whatever it is. I just hope that people remember that what's going on in the world and the politics and the ruling class, like, that doesn't have to be our whole focus. And I'm saying this to myself as much as to anyone else, because it's so easy to get caught up in the news cycles and this happened and that happened and he said that and she said that, and I have to make it. Well, not everybody's making videos about it, but I can totally relate to how activated we can get. And I just think that, as I said earlier, I really think that the people in power, maybe I didn't say it exactly like this, but people in power feed off that. Our reactivity, our hatred, our just our rage, like, they feed off that and they use it. So I think the more that we can come back to ourselves and our communities and our families and our friends and come back to grounding and find centering within ourselves, I think the less likely we are to get whipped around by all the chaos in the world. And I think whatever else is going on, whatever your opinions on anything, I think that, or I hope that that's something we can all understand, regardless of our beliefs and our biases. And even if you think that my political ideas are just stupid and naive, like, maybe it does resonate that, like, hey, I've been a bit activated lately and the news cycle is pretty stressful. Maybe it would be helpful to myself and everyone around me to take some time to care for myself, which I think comes back to what we're talking about is everybody wants the government to save them, but you got to do it yourself. And I think that comes to our nervous systems and our emotional well-being too.
Wonderful words, Carey. So thank you very, very much, and you have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks for having me. Good to chat with you again.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.